A car was running at a high speed through the heavy rain. Suddenly it lost its balance and... I'm sorry, Mom. Dad. I was so stupid. I'm sorry. Dylan had always believed that love, once chosen, was not something you walked away from. It was not a fleeting feeling, not a convenience, and certainly not something that disappeared just because it hurt. Love, to him, was devotion that grew deeper in loneliness, loyalty that survived neglect, and hope that refused to die even when crushed again and again. That belief was the reason he still waited every night in a house that never felt like home, under a roof that echoed with silence more than words. The villa was large, too large for two people who barely existed in the same space. The lights were warm, the furniture expensive, yet nothing about it felt alive. Dylan sat alone on the couch, fingers wrapped around a cup of tea he had reheated 3 times already. It had gone cold again, just like every meal he prepared for Austin, just like every emotion he offered and never received. He was an Omega, soft by nature, gentle in scent, raised by parents who taught him kindness before pride. And yet, for Austin, he had learned to be stubborn. Stubborn enough to endure years of emotional starvation. Stubborn enough to smile when his heart bled. Because he loved an alpha who never loved him back. The ring on his finger glinted faintly under the dim light. Dylan touched it unconsciously, as if needing to remind himself that the marriage was real, that he hadn't imagined those vows, that he hadn't given up his parents, his safety, and his future for nothing. He remembered the beginning far too clearly. The day he saved Austin's grandfather, he hadn't known who the old man was. He only saw someone struggling to breathe, collapsing onto the pavement, eyes filled with fear. Dylan had knelt beside him without hesitation, calling for help, holding his shaking hand, whispering soft reassurances until the ambulance arrived. His clothes were soaked with sweat and rain, his hands trembling, but he never let go. Later, when he stood in that hospital room, overwhelmed and nervous, he finally met Austin properly. Cold eyes, sharp features, a presence that made the air feel heavier. And yet Dylan fell anyway. Austin's grandfather saw it, saw the way Dylan's gaze lingered, the way his voice softened when Austin spoke, the way love bloomed quietly without expectation. The old man, already aware of his approaching death, made one final decision. Austin, he called, voice weak but firm, marry him. Austin's response had been immediate and merciless, I won't. I don't love him. You don't need to, the old man replied calmly. But he loves you. And he saved my life. I won't entrust him to anyone else. Dylan had agreed without hesitation. Even when his parents begged him not to. He will break your heart, his mother cried, holding him close. I'll be fine, Dylan whispered, smiling softly. As long as I can stay by his side. He believed that loving Austin was enough. But he was wrong. The sound of the door opening snapped Dylan back to the present. His heart leaped instinctively, that foolish hope resurfacing despite everything. He stood up immediately, smoothing his clothes, forcing a gentle smile onto his face. You're home, he said softly. I made dinner. I want a divorce. Austin announced. It was too sudden. The words were sharp, emotionless, and final. Dylan felt the world tilt. The cup slipped from his hand, crashing to the floor, porcelain shattering loudly, but the sound felt distant, unreal. His ears rang as if submerged underwater. Divorce, he whispered, staring at Austin as though he'd spoken a foreign language. Austin loosened his tie, his expression irritated rather than conflicted. My grandfather is dead. The reason for this marriage is gone. I won't continue living like this. The words carved into Dylan's chest slowly, deliberately. This isn't living? Dylan asked weakly. I've tried so hard. I stayed quiet, I never asked for anything, I just... You have tried hard to disgust me with your obsession. Austin cut in coldly. Don't pretend this was ever love. Dylan's knees buckled, and he sank onto the couch, tears spilling uncontrollably. He hated himself for crying. Hated how easily Austin reduced him to this, small, broken, and desperate. "I won't agree," Dylan said hoarsely, lifting his head despite the tears. There was something stubborn burning behind his eyes now, something painful and fierce. "I won't divorce you." Austin scoffed. "You think clinging to me will change anything?" Dylan stood up shakily, fists clenched against his chest as though holding his heart together. "I married you knowing you didn't love me," he cried. "I chose this. I chose you. So don't think you can just throw me away when it's convenient." Austin's eyes hardened. "You're nothing but a responsibility I was forced to accept." Dylan's voice trembled, but his resolve did not. "Then I'll stay as that responsibility," he said through sobs. "Even if you hate me. Even if you never touch me. I won't leave." "Why?" Austin demanded coldly. "What are you even holding on to?" Dylan pressed his trembling hand over his heart. "Because I love you," he whispered brokenly. "And unless I'm dead, I won't let go of this marriage." The room fell silent. Austin stared at him as if looking at something incomprehensible, something weak, something bothersome. He clicked his tongue. "Your love is disgusting." And then he turned away. Days blurred into endless suffering. Arguments became routine. Austin's words grew sharper, colder, while Dylan grew quieter, thinner, and more hollow. He slept alone every night, wrapped around the emptiness Austin left behind. No arms held him when he cried. No voice comforted him when his heart shattered again and again. Every day felt like dying slowly. Still, Dylan loved him. That love did not lessen. It rotted inside him, heavy and painfully. One stormy evening, desperate to escape the silence, Dylan turned on the television. His body was weak, his scent dull, his eyes lifeless. Then he saw him on the news. Austin stood on the screen, flawless and composed. Beside him was a beautiful Omega, smiling brightly as Austin leaned slightly toward him, an intimacy Dylan had never known. Austin Blackwood spotted with his Omega companion, the headline read. Dylan's heart stopped. "No," he whispered, hands shaking violently. "Please, no." He needed to see Austin. He needed to speak to him. Ignoring the storm outside, Dylan grabbed his keys and rushed out. The rain did not fall gently that night. It crashed down from the sky as if the heavens themselves had shattered, thick sheets of water slamming against the earth without mercy. The road was soaked, gleaming under scattered streetlights like a long stretch of glass waiting to break. Wind howled violently, shaking trees, bending them as if they too were bowing under grief. Inside the car, Dylan's fingers clenched the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The headlights barely cut through the rain. Everything beyond a few meters dissolved into darkness, yet he kept driving, breath shallow, chest aching as if something sharp was lodged inside. His heart felt torn open, bleeding silently with every second that passed. Austin. That name lived in his thoughts like a wound that refused to close. The image of Austin on the news replayed endlessly in his mind. The way he had smiled at another Omega, the warmth Dylan had begged for years to receive. That smile had never been meant for him. Dylan had known it deep down, yet seeing it so clearly shattered whatever fragile hope he had been clinging to. His vision blurred, not from the rain, but from tears. "Why?" Dylan whispered to the empty car, his voice trembling and hoarse. "Why are you treating me like this? What did I do so wrong?" The road curved sharply ahead. The tires slid. Dylan felt it instantly, the sickening loss of control, the steering wheel turning uselessly beneath his grip. Panic surged through his body as the car swerved violently to the side. He pressed the brakes instinctively, but the wheels only skidded harder against the soaked asphalt. The car spun. Metal screamed as it scraped against the guardrail, sparks flashing briefly before disappearing into the rain. Dylan's heart slammed against his ribs as fear finally overtook heartbreak. No, no. The guardrail gave way. The world tipped. For a split second, there was weightlessness, a terrifying, silent pause where time seemed to stretch endlessly. Dylan's body lurched forward as the car plunged off the cliff, gravity pulling everything down into the abyss below. The impact came in stages. First, the violent crash against jagged rock, metal folding in on itself with a deafening roar. Glass shattered explosively, rain and blood mixing as the car tumbled uncontrollably downward. Dylan's head struck the side window, pain exploding behind his eyes as darkness crept in and out of his vision. The world spun. Another collision. His body was thrown violently, ribs screaming in agony. Something snapped, bone or metal, he couldn't tell. His ears rang, drowning out everything except his own panicked heartbeat. And then, as the car continued its brutal descent, something inside Dylan broke, not physically, but emotionally. Austin faded from his mind. In that final, terrifying moment, another thought surged forward with devastating clarity. My parents. His mother's warm hands brushing his hair, his father's quiet presence beside him. Their worried eyes on the day he chose love over them. Fear unlike anything he had ever known seized him. If I die, Dylan sobbed, his voice swallowed by the storm. What will happen to them? Tears streamed freely as the car crashed again, finally slamming into a rocky ledge near the bottom of the cliff. Metal twisted violently, crushing inward. Pain ripped through Dylan's body, red-hot and overwhelming. I'm sorry, he whispered brokenly, blood filling his mouth. I'm so sorry. Darkness swallowed him whole. Hours later, the rain had not stopped. Emergency lights flashed uselessly at the top of the cliff, their red and blue glow cutting weakly through the storm. Rescue teams searched tirelessly, but the terrain was unforgiving, steep, jagged, and nearly inaccessible in the downpour. Fragments of metal were found. Shattered glass. Torn pieces of a vehicle scattered across the rocks below. But no intact car. And no Omega. Austin was in his office when the news reached him. The lights were dim, paperwork neatly arranged on his desk. He sat motionless in his chair, staring at nothing in particular, his mind still echoing with the argument from days before, Dylan crying, refusing to leave, promising to stay even if unloved. The phone rang. He answered without thinking. The words spoken on the other end washed over him like distant noise, formal, restrained, final. He listened, but his expression never changed. His hand tightened slowly around the phone, knuckles whitening, yet his face remained eerily calm. When the call ended, Austin did not move. He sat there in silence. No denial came. No questions followed. No disbelief surfaced. It was as if his mind had simply stopped. Time passed, minutes, maybe hours. Someone entered the office, spoke his name, but Austin did not respond. His eyes were unfocused, fixed on a past moment he could not escape. That night, he returned to the villa. The door opened to darkness. No light turned on automatically. No soft voice greeted him. The air felt colder than ever, empty in a way that pressed heavily against his chest. Austin stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside. Dylan was gone. Dylan's parents arrived the next day. Grief had aged them cruelly, stealing color from their faces, bending their backs under an unbearable weight. His mother collapsed the moment she saw the confirmation documents, her cries raw and unrestrained. His father held her tightly, his own eyes red, his lips trembling as he struggled to remain standing. Their only child. Gone. Austin stood at a distance, silent. He did not approach them. He did not speak. And when his gaze met theirs briefly, Dylan's parents turned away, choosing grief over acknowledging the man who had stood at the center of their son's suffering. No accusations were spoken. None were needed. 5 years passed. The world did not pause for loss. People moved on, celebrated milestones, fell in love, started families. Seasons changed without waiting for broken hearts to catch up. But Austin remained frozen in time. The villa never changed. Dylan's things stayed exactly where they were, his clothes folded neatly, his books untouched, his scent long faded but remembered too well. The silence inside those walls was suffocating, heavier than any argument they had ever shared. Austin lived like a machine. Wake. Work. Return home. Repeat. No warmth. No emotion. No future. At night, memories haunted him relentlessly. Dylan's soft voice, his stubborn devotion, the way he smiled even through tears. Only after losing him did Austin understand what that quiet presence had meant. By the time he realized it, it was too late. Late regret was worthless. Far away, fate took a cruelly ironic turn. A small medical facility buzzed with quiet activity. Sunlight filtered gently through the window, illuminating an Omega lying on the bed. Bandages covered his eyes, his face thinner, paler, but alive. A doctor's hands moved carefully. Slowly, the doctor said softly with a gentle smile. The bandages were removed. Light flooded in. Dylan gasped. His breath hitched as blurred shapes slowly formed, colors, movement, reality returning piece by piece. I can see, he whispered, disbelief and gratitude trembling in his voice. He smiled. A small, fragile smile, filled with pain, survival, and the future no one knew existed. Saved by a medical volunteer researching near the cliff, pulled from the wreckage and given a second chance, Dylan lived. To the world he was dead. The accident had taken almost half of Dylan's life. Not in years alone, though 5 of them were swallowed whole, but in pieces. It took his sight first, plunging him into a world of endless darkness where time lost meaning and nights never ended. It took his strength, his innocence, his belief that loving someone selflessly would someday be rewarded. It carved pain into his bones, left scars across his body, and rewrote his face until even mirrors felt like strangers. Yet it did not take his life. For reasons Dylan still could not fully understand, fate had chosen to leave him breathing, broken, altered, but alive. As if the world, having punished him enough, finally decided to give him a second chance. 5 years. 5 years of surgeries, rehabilitation, silent tears soaked into hospital pillows, and whispered apologies to parents who believed their only child lay beneath cold earth. 5 years of waking up afraid, of sleeping afraid, of learning to exist again without sight, with the name Austin carved into his heart like a wound that refused to heal. And now, after all that time, Dylan could see again. The bandages had come off slowly, carefully. Evan's voice steady and reassuring as light returned in fragments. At first, everything had been a blur of colors and unfamiliar shapes. Dylan had cried then too, overwhelmed by something as simple as sunlight filtering through a window, by the shape of hands he had only felt before, by faces he had memorized through touch. But as his vision stabilized over the following weeks, another fear grew stronger. Now that he could see again, now that he was no longer hiding in darkness, there was only one place his heart kept pulling him toward. Home. The thought terrified him. Dylan stood in front of the mirror in his hospital room, fingers trembling as they traced the unfamiliar lines of his face. Plastic surgery had erased the worst of the scars, reshaped what the accident had destroyed, but it had also changed him. His eyes were the same, but sharper somehow. His cheekbones more defined. His jaw slightly different. He did not look exactly like the son his parents had lost. What if they don't believe me? What if they think I'm cruel for returning after so long? What if they don't want me anymore? The guilt crushed him. Every night, he dreamed of his mother's tears, of his father standing silently at the funeral he had never attended. He dreamed of how stubborn he had been, how he had walked away from them for a man who never loved him, how he had chosen loneliness over the warmth that had always waited for him at home. I don't deserve to see them, Dylan whispered once, voice shaking. Dr. Evan held him in his arms, as he had done for years. You deserve to live, Evan said gently. And they deserve to know that their child didn't die. Those words warmed Dylan's heart. Dylan had shaken uncontrollably, tears soaking into Evan's coat as the doctor held him steady. Evan was not loud in his care. He did not push, did not demand. He stayed, day after day, night after night, until Dylan trusted him enough to breathe again. You don't have to go alone, Evan continued softly. I'll be with you. So now, 5 years after the world buried him, Dylan stood at the edge of his old street. The house was still there. Smaller than he remembered. Quieter, but undeniably home. The sight of it shattered him. The moment Dylan stepped out of the car, his knees nearly buckled. His breath came out in broken gasps as memories crashed into him all at once. His mother waiting at the door, his father reading in the living room, the warmth he had once taken for granted. I left them, Dylan whispered, tears spilling freely now. I chose him over them. His body began to shake violently, grief and regret ripping through him without mercy. He covered his face, sobbing uncontrollably as his legs finally gave out. Evan caught him instantly, wrapping strong arms around him, holding him upright as Dylan cried like a child who had lost everything. I was so selfish, Dylan choked. So stupid. I hurt them so much. Evan said nothing. He simply held him tighter. The front door opened suddenly. Dylan didn't notice at first. Too lost in his grief, too broken by the weight of everything he had nearly lost forever. But Evan felt it. He stiffened slightly, his gaze lifting. A woman stepped out. Dylan's mother. She heard a cry. Raw, desperate, heart-wrenching, and instinctively rushed outside, fear gripping her chest. When she saw a man collapsed in another man's arms, sobbing as if the world had ended, her heart began to race uncontrollably. Something about him felt wrong. No. Familiar. Her eyes locked onto his face. Different. But not unfamiliar. Her breath caught painfully in her throat. That bone structure, those eyes. Her heart pounded violently, fear and hope crashing together so hard that it hurt. Her lips trembled. Baby, she whispered, voice breaking as she took a step forward. Is that? Are you back? Dylan froze. Slowly, trembling, he lifted his head. Mom. The sound shattered whatever fragile restraint she had left. She ran. She wrapped her arms around him tightly, desperately, as if afraid he would disappear if she let go. Dylan broke completely then, crying harder than he ever had before as he clung to her, burying his face in her shoulder like he had done as a child. I'm sorry, he sobbed. I'm so sorry. I'm back. I'm really back. Her hands shook as she held his face, touching him again and again as if reassuring herself that he was real. My baby, she cried. His father appeared at the door moments later, drawn by the sound of his wife's cries. When he saw Dylan in her arms, he stood frozen. Then his eyes filled with tears. He crossed the distance silently and pulled them both into his embrace, holding his family together as if afraid fate might try to steal them again. The street echoed with quiet sobs. Neighbors watched from a distance, confused but respectful, witnessing something they did not understand. Inside the house, everything smelled the same. Dylan sat in front of his parents, hands clutched tightly in Evan's, his gaze lingering on every familiar object as if afraid to forget again. His parents looked older. Lines etched deeper into their faces, hair streaked with gray. Because of him. I'm sorry, Dylan said again, voice trembling. I won't disobey you anymore. I promise. I was wrong. I was so wrong. His parents said nothing at first. They only looked at him with love. Then, slowly, their gazes shifted, to the man sitting quietly. Dr. Evan. Their eyes moved from Evan to Dylan's neck. Marked. Their expressions changed, softened, sharpened with understanding all at once. You are marked, Dylan's mother said quietly. Dylan silently looked down, blush spreading from his ears to neck. His father looked at Evan. Are you his alpha? Evan straightened up without hesitation. Yes, he said calmly. Do you love him? Dylan's mother asked, her voice steady but fierce. Will you protect him? Will you ever let him suffer? Evan didn't hesitate. He is my love, he said gently, pulling Dylan into his arms. I hold him above anyone else. I would never hurt him, not even in my dreams. Dylan's face flushed red instantly. Hey! Shut up, he protested shyly, hitting Evan weakly on the chest. Evan laughed softly, holding him closer. His parents watched, really watched. And for the first time in years, felt their hearts ease. Later, in the kitchen, Dylan helped his mother prepare tea. The silence between them was comfortable, healing. She glanced at him carefully. Are you over with Austin? She asked gently. Dylan paused. Then he smiled, soft, calm, peaceful. The one who loved Austin died in that accident. This life was given by Evan, he said quietly. I'm someone new now. I don't have any attachment or relationship to him anymore. His mother's eyes filled with tears again, this time with relief. This is a new chapter, Dylan continued. I want to live it, with my family, my lover, and my friends. Outside, the sun dipped low in the sky. If you like the story, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe. See you again with a new story soon. Until then, stay tuned.